Hi, Himanshu. Welcome to the podcast.
Hi, Avish. Thank you for having me.
It's our absolute pleasure. So, to begin with, tell us something about Adobe that we do not know.
So I'll tell you what is one of those things that I learned about Adobe when I joined Adobe 7 years back, right? So one of the things that I learned was that I always felt that Adobe is all about Creative Cloud, which is like Adobe Photoshop and Illustrator and InDesign and just Document Cloud, right? So yes, Adobe is primarily known for its Creative Cloud and Document Cloud businesses. However, what I didn't know was like Adobe also has a pretty strong and well-established marketing and commerce suite that empowers businesses to harness their data and deliver experiences that drive business growth and customer loyalty. So that is one thing that I didn't know about Adobe when I was joining. And on another front, like one of the things that I adore about Adobe is exceptional core values, right? I mean, we have these are like four core values that Adobe has, which are being genuine, exceptional, innovative, and involved. And personally, Adobe is really one of the best when it comes to fostering innovation in a genuine way. So I think these are some things that I didn't know about Adobe when I was joining, but yeah, it's taken me 7 years to kind of really know them better.
All right. So, you said you have been with the firm for 7 years. So, can you share a little bit about your current role, um, the different transitions that you have been through in the last 7 years? So, your entire corporate journey so far.
Yeah, sure. So I'm an experienced design manager at Adobe today. I lead user experience for two digital imaging offerings, namely Photoshop Express and the Photoshop Element Suite. Uh, as I said, I joined Adobe 7 years ago, and I've been fortunate to have worked, and contributed to a myriad of products for a lot of users, starting from Adobe Connect, which is a virtual conferencing and e-learning offering to Adobe, right? Then to Experience Cloud, which is a suite of products for enabling marketeers to reach their audiences, and now to leading, design team for the digital image offerings for consumers and non-pros. So over these 7 years, I've grown from an individual contributor to a manager, and leading teams and contributing, and growing from a pixel level contributor to more of a strategic and a business level contributor. And I couldn't have wished for a better place and environment than Adobe.
Wonderful. Um, Next, I want to talk about UI and UX, right? I think these are terms that everybody is familiar with.
Yeah.
And from the point of a business school student, a wide assortment of roles that they would be entering into, everything ranging from finance to marketing to product management. How has the discussion around interface and user experience changed over the last few years?
Sure. Um, One thing that I want to clearly outline is that you would, when you see like resumes flowing around, and you see like people talking about design, they generally talk about UI/UX, right?
Yeah.
Which I feel is a misnomer, because both of them are like very different things, right? And this actually shows us our growth, right, of this design as an industry, which has had in a couple of 10, probably 15 years. So everything started from just the UI, which is just the user interface, right? So in the past, we thought that the design was an afterthought to digital product themes, and which was partly because the understanding or the visibility about the impact of good design on business was limited, right? And hence the teams used to just use it more for making their end result look good, right? And as an item in checklist, and that is where the UI part of it came in. That we need somebody who would work on UI, which is the user interface, which is the end product, and just look it good, look, make it look good and beautiful and everything. However, with the increasing exposure of people to digital experiences and more understanding about impact and the ROI of design, and obviously increasing competition, businesses have started investing in design a lot more, right? And seriously, and they have started to include it in their core strategy, and that is why the UX term kind of started becoming more, uh, you know, uh, famous, which is the user experience, which is not just UI, but everything, the user experiences while one is experiencing the product, or the business, or anything that one has. And there are some people who have kind of lost their way, and they still refer it's like we need everything called design. So we don't, and they don't really understand what they need, and they just say that UI/UX, which is actually tells us what that growth has been. And with so many businesses trying to compete for the limited time and the same pool of users attention, right, UX has actually become a key differentiator now, and the times are changing as well. And thus the expectations and roles of UX as an industry. For example, with the rise of deep fake videos and misinformation, you know which are being used to drive political agendas, or it actually makes us question our sense of reality, right? Whether are we just talking about making things beautiful now, or are we talking about how can we have better impact, or can have be more ethical about whatever we are doing as a business. So there is a need to focus the efforts on designing for transparency and encouraging critical thinking, right? And moreover, with new forms of consumption, right now we are not just limited to screens for digital consumptions, right? We have AR, we have VR, we have voice interfaces. So UX has this responsibility to bring these technologies to the masses, and hence from just being like a person who makes something beautiful look beautiful, UX or design as an industry has actually kind of become more wholesome. But obviously with that, the noise around it has also increased, right? You have more and more noise around it. As I said, right, one of those being UI/UX, people don't know understand, but they don't understand what they want, but they are looking out for a checklist item again for having good designers on their team and stuff like that. So I think there has been an immense growth and understanding in design. But yes, it's a double-edged sword. There are a lot of things that are going other way also.
I completely agree with that. I think it's a very interesting point that you make about the noise around it. See, it's nice to have more conversations around design, but then it can't be conversation for conversation's sake, right?
Exactly.
Like there are so many clients who just come to me. I mean, I work as a data analyst, but they tell me that we want design to be more integral to the dashboards that we are creating or to the story, that we are presenting. And I
Yes.
asked them, but why do you want to do it? I mean, you can't do it just because the other people seem to be doing it and it
Exactly.
seems to be a buzzword, right?
Yep.
So I think it is a double-edged sword. And I think one really has to think about what your objective is, right?
Yep.
You can't force feed design into an organization, right? Whether it's UI or UX or anything else, right? And
Yep.
I think the other point that you made about having quick fixes, I think that's another problem. Clients want a top 10 checklist. They can just check the boxes and magically everything will reinvent itself. This is a journey, right? It's a journey, it's a process. It's not a change that can happen overnight. And that is what
Yep.
they need to understand, that even if the leadership takes the call of doing something, it has to be communicated to the right people at the right time in the right manner. And I think that is a bigger challenge. We have software with us, we have budgets allocated, but simply giving people access to content doesn't mean that they will know how to use it, right?
Exactly.
So I think that's very important. All right. Okay. So as a continuation of what we were discussing, if I had asked you 7 years back,
Hmm.
could you envision where Adobe would be today? What would be the type of user experiences you are creating and the conversations around design around the world? You also spoke about a broader aspect, in terms of deepfake videos and how the leadership has to have something to say and comment on that. You
Yep.
can't just be at the backseat saying that we are a product company and we don't care about these conversations. You are a part of these conversations, whether you like it or not.
Yes.
How do you think, if we reconnect after 7 years, how do you think the conversation would evolve, and where do you see design headed and where do you see Adobe headed in the next 7 years?
I think that's an interesting, really interesting question, because I think Adobe as a company has always been very vocal about and very supportive of the community that design and creativity is, right? I mean, and because we are really like pioneering in making tools for creativity, we empowering people. Our motto is to be make people more creative. Actually, I think it's our sole responsibility also to make sure that that conversation is in a healthy space, right? And I think with because the times are changing, the digital trends are changing, right? The people are becoming more and more creative in the sense that, for example, this pandemic has made like a very big impact on how everybody works, right? People have now found out this new thing called work from home, wherein they have more time, with their families and with their friends, and they want to actually tell their stories more, even more and more, right? And hence everybody wants to kind of share what they have. Everybody wants to story tell, right? So the tools that empower these people kind of will change with time, and that is, I think, one of the biggest things that I think we'll see changing, right? Let's, for example, 7 years back, we didn't have like an idea or a concept of like a non-pro consumer being creative and wanting to share something with the world, right? It was only this perverted group of designers somehow, or people who are who were labeled as creative, which I think again is a misnomer, because I think every human is creative. But I think there was this like these are like 5 people in the 100 people team, that these people are creative, and these people will only communicate what we stand for and stuff like that. So the tools that were being made were for this very trained and very pro design segment, for so to say. But now in the last 7 years, we have seen that another we have seen like a normal layman, like for example my parents, right? When they wake up in the morning, or they want to communicate good morning to like all of their families, right? So they want to tell and communicate things to their families now, right? Which, and they are not professionals by any means, right? So we need tools that empower such consumers and non-professionals to kind of also tell their story and be creative, right? So I think this is one major shift that we'll see. Like probably in the next 10 years, we'll see this divide between consumers and professionals even like probably go away even more, right? We'll see that here everybody would want to be creative and be actually tell their story to the whole wide world, right? And the other very important aspect is, I think, is the aspect about ethics, right? Now, because uh, with tools, I mean, as tools become more powerful, right, the ways in which it can be used in a non-ethical way do also increase, right? And you would see that there is another side of this pendulum, wherein people are using the same creative tools for making deep fake videos, and probably for pornography, and for creating so much of malice in the society. So I think that is one major aspect that we'll also see in the next 7 to 10 years, which is that how can tools not only empower people to be more creative, but can also stop such activities, or probably play some role in making reducing the negative impact of such tools on the society.
Right. You mentioned empowering individuals, and
Yep.
coming from data, we believe in the same thing. We call it self-service business intelligence, which means that rather than having that hallowed team in a company which has, all the information, and every time I need something, I have to give them a call, and the IT team has to, get the database for me.
Yep.
Now we are empowering people, right? So
Yep.
any end user, without learning SQL or without learning how to write a complex formula, can directly connect using a tool like Microsoft Power BI and get the
Yep.
information.
Yep.
But the challenge that we have seen is the fact that when you empower people too much, there is also a question of brand guidelines, maintaining uniformity, right? And I think education for me is super important. A lot of organizations say that training requirements have come down because we have access to so many more resources. But I tell people that training requirements are only going to go higher, because giving people access to an overwhelming amount of content is only going
Yep.
to confuse them even more. And organizations need to have that checks in place to make sure that
Yep.
they're using it properly, right? And I'm sure you would agree with me on that, that the training of people is something where you guys need to work on. So my question here is that, does Adobe also have a connect with organizations? So if you talk about the large organizations in the world, like, do you have a constant communication going on in terms of how should end users be using it? For example, let's say you're working on Photoshop or you're working on Illustrator. So is it just a product sale that happens, or are there also conversations around how should the end users be using it? Like, do you train people as well, or do you work with partners on that? If you
Obviously,
could.
yes. I mean, for a company like Adobe, as big as Adobe, and I mean, it actually depends on the needs of every customer, right? For example, with Adobe going on to cloud, what Adobe did was actually give the software in hands of every person, right? You can just wake up in the morning, open a laptop, download Adobe Suite, and start using it, right? So Adobe, in that sense, does not have control on who is using it, right? However, if your needs are of somebody of who wants to learn, that's definitely that happens today also, right? For example, if there is a large industry or a company who is kind of who's transitioning from another creative tool to say like Adobe Creative Cloud Suite, they might have some requirement and needs of learning about, and how can how can their employees be better at using the tools. There definitely is some kind of a formal training that happens and is in place. However, and obviously, because as you said, right, I mean, everybody is sharing today, right, on YouTube or on Instagram, on a Snapchat and everything. So there are a lot of self tutorials and trainings also that people do undertake, right? That, this is, how you use the tool and stuff like that. However, one has to understand that tool is just for empowering, right? How you use the tool actually depends on your values, I would say, and more than just needs, right, and requirements, right? If you, and that is where I think any kind of training cannot fulfill your, I mean, what you need and how would you want to use. Yes, there are some very key basic stuff that you need to understand how to use a tool. However, and again, going forward, right, we are constantly putting more and more effort as to how can we make our tools dead simple to use, right? And how can we bridge that gap of saying that, hey, if somebody of the age of, say, my father, who's like almost 60 or 70, right, and one day he has this epiphany that, that I want to be a designer. How can we, how can the tool actually reduce the gap of saying, that, hey, uh, hey, father, 60 or 70 your father, however you're not very well versed with the computer or the digital products. However, this tool looks and behaves so simply that, you can still, without any formal training, just kind of open a laptop and start being, and start communicating what you would want to. So I think it generally depends on how big the ask is, and what's the end goal of that need.
Sure. All right. Um, what are your thoughts on design thinking in terms of do you feel that it's meant for a specific set of profiles and industries? Do you feel it is something that needs to be a part of common conversation and all students, need to understand what design thinking is, not from a very technical viewpoint, but from a broader aspect?
Yeah. So when you talk about design is nothing but, a plan to achieve a particular purpose, right? Or to solve a problem, or to fulfill an objective, right? So design education can really equip people to, with a variety of problem solving tools, right? Like empathy, prototyping, and, multidisciplinary collaboration, and etc. So I think design as a mindset is not really very, limited to, say, a very few people, because that is one thing that comes naturally to us, right? I mean, when you're at home, you might not be a labeled designer, but you're solving problems day in day out, right? You are making so many decisions in your life, which are nothing but, problem solving, right? And therefore I think learning about design frameworks can really enable students to consider multi-directional and non-linear approach to problem solving, right? Let's, for example, I myself have kind of, come from a engineering background. I've done my bachelor's in engineering, electronics and communication, and then I kind of, moved on from a engineering heavy mindset, wherein we somehow kind of, looked at problems in linear fashion, right? It always has to come down from one step to the other, and we didn't really say that, hey, I can converge and diverge, in a given problem set, right? And that is what has actually design played a role in my life also. And I think which is the same thing that it can actually that's the impact it can have on other people's also, right? And it will give you like an ability to keep a big picture in mind while working, and also while you're working on individual problems, right, and find creative solutions. And there's another concept called human centered approach in design, which really focuses on customers and their needs rather than on a specific technology and conditions, right? For example, as I said, right, when I was working as an engineer, all our solutions were around the technology. What could that technology do for people, and not the other way around, wherein what can we do for our users, and then see what technology needs, how can technology be a part of it. So I think being open to design can actually help you innovate, because innovation occurs at the intersection of business, technology, and what people want, right? So I think in the intersection of this radial, I guess that is where that new innovation comes out, and which I think is very important for anybody, or any student, like be it business school or engineering, or data scientist, and everybody can actually take it.
Right. Okay. Now, coming back to students, I teach at a lot of colleges. I judge a lot of competitions where students have to do a combination of data analytics and then present using slides. And what I've realized after doing about 50 of these competitions is that it's very easy to spot when a slide or when a presentation does not look good, but it's very difficult to spot what are the areas of improvement. Like students come to me and say, we have done a wonderful job with the analytics bit, but when it comes to the presentation side of it, right, we are not really happy with what we have done. And I'm also at a loss, right, because I can teach them the tools. I can tell them how to do a transition on PowerPoint, or I can tell them how to apply an animation, or how to ungroup a SVG image, or how to overlay a video on top of some text. But then this all sounds very technical in nature, right? So a, do you feel that learning design is important to all the B school students? And B, if so, then what are the first three, four, five steps that you think that they should be taking? Is it, I mean, is there like a research paper that they should read? Is there a report that they should read? Is there some existing guidelines that they should be aware of? Are there some samples available, that you can point out to them? Like I usually tell them to go to evernote.design, but then they get lost, right? Because Evernote or design has like hundreds of things in it, and it takes a lot of time and effort and maturity to even navigate through that ocean of content out there. Otherwise you just get
Yes.
lost, right? So I don't think too much content is a good thing. Too much content always also can be very overwhelming. So what would be your insight and suggestion for B school students?
So I think, again, as I said, right, it's very contextual to what one's needs are, right? There is no one same simple example. Let's say if you go to the website, look at it, and you learn everything that you need about design, right? It's all about what your needs are as a student, as a business school student, and what are you, looking out for as a value. Let's say, for example, as I said, right, you are in B school, you're working on like a strategy document or a business plan that you're working on, right? There, design tools and being aware of design tools like empathy mapping, or user research and double diamond and all that stuff will actually help you be more open, and be more inclusive of the users, and hence create a better product, a design business, or a story, or stuff like that. And similarly, if you are somebody who wants to do storytelling and convey what you're doing, through a PPT deck, for example, right? There, the tools that you have access to would be very different, right? There, I would say that, like, anyways, like, storytelling is, conveying your purpose, right? It's about how can you convey what you want, and actually, if you're a business school student, how can you win loyalty of your customers, right? And that's, for example, Steve Jobs, right? Steve Jobs was not only a great product person, but he was like an amazing storyteller, right? Because in the end of the days, the customers are not really buying a product; they're buying a story, right? And hence, I think storytelling is another very important aspect of that. I guess business school students can actually derive value out of for design, right? So. Uh, I think as B school student, assuming they're working on the data requirements and product strategy, and and this is where I think visual storytelling can help them a lot, right? Let's some basic understanding of how colors work. What tone should one use while they are communicating to people, right? And what's the best infographic or the best data visualization that one can use, can be a lot of importance. And that is why I think when you gave that example, right? When you say people to, your students to go to a particular website, they get lost, right? Because I think that is happening because the students at that point in time do not want that. I mean, they want more understanding about how color works, and not probably how design in general works. So I think it's very important for students to first understand what are their needs, and then kind of go out and look for a tool that would empower them to do that, right? And very basic stuff, right? Like for example, how small a font is very small for your PPT deck, right? Or how do you balance visuals with text, right? Because all of these things will help you communicate your story better. I think they are like plethora of resources out there. Like if you go and Google just like how to like graphic essentials of graphic design and everything, you'll find so many good resources. So I think in today's age, the problem is not that you don't have enough material. I think the problem is that you first have to ask the right question, like what is that you want to Google. And I think that is something that I would leave the students away with, that first understand where you are in your journey and what value do you want design to give you, and then probably ask Google and then have access to all the resources.
Absolutely. I think asking the right question is a skill that we need to develop.
Yes,
A lot of people think that it's only about asking a question, but you have to train yourself at asking the right
exactly.
questions.
Yep.
Something that I did that worked for me. So I, over the last few years, have been doing a lot of storytelling with data trainings, just like a confluence of data and design.
Yep.
And the first thing that I did was not to go online and search for the best reports and white papers and all. I downloaded 200 PDFs from some of the best firms in the world. So I would look at a BCG and a Bain and a Google and a WPP, download their 15, 20, 50 pages, and I would just go through it. I would not even read the content per se. I would just look at visually how are they presenting the data. And
Yep.
when you keep an Accenture and let's say a BCG side by side, you're able to literally spot the differences, right? In the way they are communicating, in the way they prepare their flow, their table of content, the size that they're using. Accenture obviously, is very diverse. So obviously their design is also impacting their consulting arm now, right? Invariably that is happening. So it's more flashy in terms of how they're presenting. A Bain or a BCG, on the other hand, will be more conservative in their approach, right? And I think this really worked for me. So after reading so many reports, I think if you ask me what are the keywords, what are the design terms that I was able to extract from it, I would probably not be able to tell you. But I always say that I got a sense of reports. And when you read a lot, you're able to put two and two together. You see similarities, you
Yep.
spot dissimilarities, and you're immediately able to say that I think they are doing something which is really nice, which you probably want to take some ideas from or you want to copy that, right? I think that really worked for me, and I agree. I think searching for the right question, I think, is a skill we all need to develop over a period of time.
Yes, and you're 100% right in that sense, right? I mean, you need to train your eyes to actually sense and start understanding and articulating that what is good and what is wrong, what is bad according to you, right? So the more experience, the more stuff you look at is when you start understanding the differences also, that hey, I've looked at say like 50, 20 reports, and now I see that like the gamut of the range of say probably a report from Accenture to BCG, right? And then you'll start understanding. So obviously, like as a student, the least that one can do is actually expose themselves to as much as you can. Like go online, get exposed. And that's the best thing, right? Everything is free, available for free, right?
Right.
Start looking at very diverse stuff, right? Do not just be just concentrate on very similar looking stuff, right? Force yourself to go out of your the safe zone per se, right? Let's say for example, and that's the same for how your taste palette also works, right? For example, if when you're eating a similar kind of a palette food, you kind of just get accustomed to that. But in a while, you should always force yourself to eat something which you probably wouldn't have wanted to, right? So that you actually get to understand the variety of taste that actually exists and there are, right? And that is how you train your palate to probably say coffee or anything else, right? Similarly, it works with eyes, right? You have to constantly look at a very diverse set of stuff, right? So to understand and start also appreciating a lot of nuances in design, and that is when people will start articulating it more better. Because there are a lot of times when they say that, hey, I like this thing, but I do not know what do I like or what do I don't like in this thing, right? Because they have not trained their eyes to look at the small nuances and stuff like that. So I think that is definitely something that one can leverage from.
No, I think that's very helpful. I think accepting the fact that you see something is good, you can appreciate it, but you're not quite able to put your finger on it, right? And I
Exactly.
think it's okay to admit that I'm not quite sure what works and what doesn't work. But if
Yes.
we have a diverse palette, like I always tell students, don't just look at reports. Look at, let's say, a brand logo, or look at the product packaging. I mean, design is everywhere around us, right? And
Yes.
if you keep yourself restricted to a certain variety of things, then you will never really learn what else is there.
Yes.
One example I'll want the listeners to also, take away from this podcast is the data ink ratio. Now, I had this question a lot of time when people would tell me, why are there reports, all reports suddenly have this full page image coming in between, two chapters? What is it doing there? What's the purpose that it is solving, right? And I used to tell them that when you're talking, do you not have pauses while you're talking, or do you just keep on talking one after the other without any pauses?
Yes.
Pauses are important, right? And that is how I used to explain to them that the purpose of having an image in a report, just a generic stock image, is not because it is solving any purpose, but that pause is important. It gives people time to sit back, think about what the first 5 pages have been, and then look at the next one. Similarly, in a slide, having that pause is very important. But what happens is, on the other hand, especially for a data heavy profile, clutter becomes, people think that there is that 1 inch of space left in the top left
The
corner. So
more
I
I
have
can
to,
show,
yeah,
yeah,
I have to
the
put
more I
something
will
there.
show the better. Yeah.
And when I do these hands-on trainings and we create dashboards on Power BI or Tableau, people say, but there's some empty space there. What can I fill there? And I tell them, why is it so important for you to fill up all the space? On the contrary, you need to have some breathing space, right? Because the user has to understand what all you have put in. You can't just clutter too many things in it. And it was much later, Himanshu, when I read about the data ink ratio, I realized that, oh, there is an entire literature behind it. And,
Yes.
there's so much of background behind it. But that's
Yes.
okay. I'm happy about the fact that I still was able to get the sensibility as to why that is important. And then over a period of time, when I interacted with other people, I realized that, oh, there are defined terminologies for this, and these are
Yes.
accepted standards that are there in the market.
Yeah, because Avish, like, see, in the end of the day, this is science, right? This is, and there is like, this is just complete science, as you said, right? There are like these theories and literature about each and everything, right? And that is what is important, right? So, and that is actually, that is what will help people do. That's, I mean, understanding or just reading Gestalt theory. I'm not saying to kind of, read and practice it and, just be very mindful of it and everything. Just reading it will give you some sense of that, hey, these are some probably major do's and don'ts that one can be aware about, because at the end of the day, it's all about, being a better storyteller, right? And just for example, you need to take care of your pauses, not only when you are kind of, presenting, also while you're speaking and everything else, right? So, and storytelling has always been like a very holistic experience, right? It even includes how you dress up while you're, presenting your story and stuff like that. So I think all of this is really important, and it has story, right? So and yes, that there's this mindset that one has, that the more I would communicate, the better it would be, which is flawed in some way. And that is what actually, being mindful about design will, bring in, right? Because when you start thinking of of users, you start centering users, everything that you do around users, that hey, I see that there is like 20-30 pixel space on the dashboard, but does my user actually need it, right? When you start questioning that, I think all of that clutter will start going away, right? And that is, and that's, it's, I mean, it's famously said, right, that it's easier to kind of, make complicated products, but and even harder to make simple products, right? Because it's harder to ask those questions to you, that is this something that has any value to my user or my customer, right? And when you start making those hard questions, you start making those hard calls also, and then probably, cut down on all that destruct that chaos and everything.
Absolutely. It's interesting because as a data analyst, we are very narcissistic. We end up creating dashboards and writing formulas because we feel it's a problem that has to be solved, not because the user really needs it at that moment.
Exactly.
And I think that's the problem that developers and coders have. We end up solving problems for problem's sake without really understanding that the user is at the center of any discussion that happens, right?
Yes.
Whatever our profile is.
And in
Absolutely.
one of my previous companies, I was actually designing a dashboard for this very big company, right? And we used to, you know, very famously, like, crack jokes that it's easier to create a dashboard, but it's difficult to decide on what needs to go there, right? I mean, you can just, it's very easy to, put in formulas and bring in this graph and that graph. But actually what's more important is that what needs to go there is actually what is of prime importance, which gets neglected, right? And 7 years back, there was this mindset as to if I'm working on a dashboard, it should have everything and anything that it should show, right? So it was not about, and dashboard is a prime property of telling a story, right? If, for example, if a CEO of a company would want to look at a dashboard, the view should be very different from somebody who is probably, an admin who's looking at dashboard each and every day. So a dashboard is nothing but actually the canvas where you're telling your story through data, right? And that is where you need to kind of put the user in the center and actually understand that, hey, if I would be a CEO of this company, would I be interested in this kind of a data or not, right? Or would I even have time to go through these 10 graphs, right? I would just want to see probably 2 graphs with like a gist or summary or something with an ability to drill down and stuff like that, right? So I think that is what that design mindset will bring in, being more empathetic towards users, and then it slowly kind of starts making away with the noise and the distraction that data might bring in your presentations.
All right. So, as we come to the last leg of the podcast, the final question that I have for you is something which is very personal to me. So, I have been working on slides and so on PowerPoint and Excel for over 15 years now. I've invested most of my career with Microsoft products. Now, everybody have from Airbnb to Amazon has said that slides are dead, right? And PowerPoint is never used in our organizations, right? So an Airbnb said that if your ideas cannot be presented on a half a page of paper, that means you're not clear about what you're saying, and different companies have different ideas on it. What is your take? And of course, you can speak on from an Adobe vantage point, or you can give me your personal opinion in terms of what is the future of PowerPoint, across organizations.
I think uh, to me, PowerPoint is just another tool, right? As I've said across all in the entire podcast, is that one has to be very mindful of the tool that you're using, right? Because in the long term, you'll start feeling that the tool is actually creating a lot of impact on what you're doing, right? And there are a lot of times that people kind of get reduced to the tool that they are using, right? So one has to be very mindful of the tool, right? And PowerPoint being one of those tools is a brilliant tool to kind of give your to tell a story, right? But it has to solve a purpose, right? I would so it actually depends on what point of journey you are and what kind of audience you want to communicate your story to, right? And this was very famously done by Jeff Bezos in Amazon, wherein he said that, hey, I don't want people to just rely on PowerPoints. I need like a proper paper with that, which had its own merits at that point in time, because there might have been time people were misusing PowerPoint, because it's very easy to kind of just write in quick bullet points and not think in between the lines, which is very important for any business person for that matter, right? And that is why probably there are companies like Amazon or probably Airbnb also, right, wherein they would see that, hey, people are probably being limited to PowerPoint, in the sense that they're talking in bullet points and not talking about the meaty stuff between them. So I think I would not just have say that it's a blanket statement kind of thing wherein PowerPoint is useless, right? I would say PowerPoint is immensely useful, but at specific time in your journey, right? And obviously, I mean, if you're resorting to PowerPoint, let's say in the very starting of your exploration, right? Let's say, for example, I'm working on a design solution, I would not open PowerPoint to kind of start jotting down my thoughts, because what happens with PowerPoint is, at some at somewhere it's a linear tool, right? You go from one slide to the other and the third and the fourth, right? So, and that kind of a thinking model is not appropriate for all the for all your times, right? When you're diverging, PowerPoint might not be the best tool, because when you're diverging, your mind needs to make those uncanny connections from one data set to another, and which PowerPoint might not do for you because it's sequential in that order, right? However, once you have your story planned out, you have understood of what you want to communicate to and how you communicate to, then probably PowerPoint might be a good manner, because you don't want the everybody and your audience to kind of tell them that, hey, these are like the mind map that I did, and this is the 1,000 things I thought about, and these are like the reasons why I shot down the 999 things, right? Most of the times when you're communicating your idea, you're just focusing on that one idea, right? And at that point in time, it becomes a very sequential thought, right? Because some kind of sequence is really important when you're doing storytelling, right? Let's say, for example, movies, right? If, for example, what think about if movies were not sequential, right? They could have these like endless stories going around, around each other. And I mean, this was this very famous book that I used to read as a kid, Goosebumps, right? It used to have like a different, ending in each and every page, right? Obviously, it was very fun to read. But then, was it the best way of communicating a story? Probably not, right? So I would say that to choose your tool very, very carefully, right? I live and breathe making tools for Adobe and for creators and customers, right? And I would say this very, very caution. Please choose to a tool which you want, right? And not be restricted by the tool. So yes, PowerPoint might not be a good tool for somebody who's probably doing some diverged thinking, or is probably has not fixated upon something and stuff like that. But in a lot of other use cases, it is a very important and a very good tool also, right? And just to kind of leave you with a thought that uh, as funny as it sounds, in back in my early career days, when I was before Adobe, I was with Persistent Systems in Pune. We used to do first two level of designs, actual designs on PowerPoint, right? The design head at that point in time said that I don't want you to spend a lot of time in making the buttons look good. So, and if the tool allows you to make a button look beautiful, you will put all your time in making that button look beautiful. So what he forced us to do, right, which obviously was a double-edged sword, but the good thing about that was we as designers were forced to think beyond how that button looked, right? So we had to kind of make peace with the fact that, hey, this is the best button that PowerPoint can make, right? But then it's actually helped us put our energies at somewhere else, which was much important, which was the strategy part of it, which was the decision making part of it, right? So as I said, I mean, I personally have even made designs of PowerPoint, but so it depends on what the need is and what do you want to actually achieve out of it.
I think that's an excellent point. Thank you so much, Himanshu. I think they were immense takeaways for all BSchool students, and it was a pleasure to host you.
Thank you so much, Avish. It's brilliant talking to you.